Title: Aliens thought humans were harmless until a Marine explained the meaning of war crimes. HFY Sci-Fi. The Zorvok Empire had seen countless species come and go across the stars. They'd conquered, exterminated, and subjugated civilizations that once dared to resist their might. When they first encountered humanity, they were indifferent, a primitive species, full of emotion and weakness. They figured Earth was just another insignificant planet in a galaxy full of less than thrilling races. The Zorvok High Command had observed human society for years, quietly studying their history and behavior. What they saw didn't concern them much. Humans waged wars, but these were small, chaotic, and mostly self-contained. They seemed utterly incapable of forming the kinds of advanced alliances or militaristic cohesion that would pose a real threat. Their weapons, clumsy and outdated, barely scratched the surface of a Zorvok ship's hull. Humanity was harmless until they weren't. It happened on a distant moon. On the fringes of Zorvok space, an exploration team of humans, tasked with investigating new planets, had stumbled across a Zorvok base. What began as a simple reconnaissance mission quickly turned into a deadly confrontation. The Zorvok thought they would crush the humans effortlessly. They underestimated one thing: the Marines. Captain Sarah O'Connell, a seasoned U.S. Marine, had been through hell and back. She had seen the worst of humanity's war crimes, had witnessed the horrors of warfare in its purest form. But nothing in her training prepared her for this. Nothing had prepared her for the aliens who thought they understood war. After the skirmish, as the Zorvok soldiers regrouped, O'Connell was captured, along with a handful of her squad mates. They were taken aboard a massive Zorvok flagship, held in a sterile cell. The aliens interrogated her, speaking in a series of harsh, guttural sounds. They were curious, fascinated even, by her resilience, her refusal to break under pressure. They wanted to know why humans fought the way they did. At first, she refused to speak, but then came the question that would change everything. "Why do you fight so savagely?" the Zorvok general asked, his 6 glowing eyes narrowing in confusion. "You are weak. Your technology primitive, your military tactics chaotic and inefficient. Yet you keep fighting." Sarah's eyes locked on him. She could see his confusion, his absolute lack of understanding. The Zorvok had never encountered a species like humans, driven not just by survival but by something deeper, something darker. She smiled grimly. "You want to know why we fight?" She leaned forward in her restraints, her voice steady but cold. "I'll tell you, General. We fight because we don't have a choice. And we fight with everything we have, because we know that in the end, it's not about the weapon or the tactics, it's about the will to win." The general seemed to ponder her words. "Your species is primitive," he murmured, almost to himself. "You still have emotions, fear, rage, hatred. They are weaknesses." Sarah's lips curled into a bitter smile. "Those emotions, they're what make us dangerous." She looked him dead in the eyes. "You think you understand war, but you don't. You don't understand what it means to break every rule, every code, to win." The Zorvok general blinked, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Sarah's voice dropped low, a dark fire igniting in her chest. "War crimes, General. Ever heard of them?" The alien officer recoiled slightly, clearly unfamiliar with the term. "War crimes? You really don't know?" Sarah let out a short laugh, shaking her head. "A war crime is when you break the rules of war, when you do something so brutal, so vile, that even your own people will turn on you. It's a line we, humans, will cross, when the enemy pushes us far enough." The general stood straighter, still unsure whether to take her seriously. "What kind of rules could you possibly have?" Sarah's eyes gleamed with a cold, calculating light. "We don't just fight for survival, we fight for our humanity. But if you push us too far, we will become monsters. We will do things, unspeakable things, that you can't even imagine. We'll make your worst atrocities look like child's play." The Zorvok general laughed, though there was no humor in it. "You think you can scare us with your words? We are the Zorvok. We are the conquerors. We take what we want. You take because you can't understand what it means to lose everything." Sarah replied sharply. "What happens when you break a species so much that they have nothing left to lose?" She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "You'll find out. We won't stop, and we won't surrender, even if it means wiping out every last one of you." A long silence followed. Then, The general, his voice now trembling ever so slightly, asked, "And what if you don't win?" "Then," Sarah said, her voice eerily calm, "we'll make sure you regret it for the rest of your existence." The Zorvok general didn't know what to make of her words. He ordered her thrown back into the cell, his mind racing. War crimes? Humanity had a concept of morality, of rules, even in the chaos of war? He had never encountered such a paradox in his long life. The Zorvok were conquerors, but they adhered to no rules, no honor. Their entire civilization was built on strength, on domination. But the humans fought for something far more dangerous. They fought with the potential for total annihilation, no rules, no mercy. The Zorvok High Command debated the implications of her words. They could no longer dismiss humanity as insignificant. The humans' willingness to go to extreme lengths, to break the very concept of what it meant to wage war, was something they hadn't prepared for. And as the Zorvok faced a new wave of human retaliation, they came to a terrifying realization. Humanity wasn't harmless. It was a force of nature, and when cornered, it would become something far worse than they ever imagined. Part 2. The Consequences of Underestimating Humans. The Zorvok High Command had always believed that their might was unrivaled across the galaxy. With ships that could obliterate entire planets and weapons capable of turning moons into craters, they thought their dominance was absolute. But after the incident on the Fringe Moon, they were forced to reconsider everything. Captain Sarah O'Connell's words had planted a seed of doubt in the mind of the Zorvok general, and that seed quickly spread like wildfire. The more they pondered the concept of war crimes, the more they realized that they had never encountered a species capable of engaging in such brutal acts out of sheer determination to survive. The Zorvok saw no moral lines in war. Victory was everything. But humanity had the capacity to break every rule, to shatter the boundaries of what was considered acceptable in warfare, and that made them a threat unlike any other. The Zorvok Sentient Council convened in secrecy. With the evidence of human unpredictability piling up, they began to reconsider their initial assessment of Earth. Their strategy had been one of subjugation, but now there was a very real possibility that a war against humanity could spiral out of control, and they were not ready to face the consequences. On Earth, the news of the human encounter with the Zorvok spread like wildfire across Earth. Humanity had been oblivious to the vastness of the universe, believing themselves to be relatively insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But now, they knew better. The first wave of Zorvok forces had already landed on several of Earth's colonies, and humanity had no choice but to respond. Sarah O'Connell had been released from her captivity after a tense standoff, but the damage had been done. The Zorvok didn't fully understand what they had awakened in the human race. Their cruelty, their indifference, had triggered something primal, something that humans had buried deep inside themselves. The first reports from the front lines were chilling. Human forces, led by military veterans and civilian militias alike, began to engage in combat with the Zorvok. But this wasn't like any war the aliens had fought before. The Zorvok soldiers were used to overwhelming force, crushing their enemies with sheer technological superiority. But humanity, fueled by fear, rage, and the knowledge that they had nothing to lose, fought with a ferocity that was unlike anything the Zorvok had ever seen. It wasn't just about defense anymore. The humans weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to ensure that the Zorvok understood the true consequences of their actions. The first retaliation. The Zorvok military began to feel the first cracks in their invincible facade. The Zorvok fleet had come to Earth's orbit, prepared to strike with overwhelming force. They expected a quick and decisive victory. But what they didn't anticipate was the ferocity with which humans defended their home. Sarah O'Connell, now a symbol of human resistance, had returned to the battlefield. She was not the only one who understood the stakes. As the battle raged on, it became clear to the Zorvok that humanity had no intention of giving up. Instead, they fought as though they had been waiting for this moment for centuries. In a shocking display, a joint human fleet, composed of military and civilian ships, managed to launch a series of guerrilla-style strikes against the Zorvok armada. The humans weren't skilled in conventional space warfare, but they were relentless. They used every available resource, from civilian transports to hacked mining drones, in an all-out assault on the Zorvok ships. But it was when the Zorvok warship Vector began its final descent toward Earth that the human resistance made their most dangerous move. O'Connell, now leading a special unit of Marines, launched a covert mission to board the Zorvok flagship itself. The mission was almost suicidal. A handful of Marines, armed with nothing but explosives and sheer determination, managed to infiltrate the Zorvok ship. They planted bombs at key points, but the real twist was their message. As the bombs were set to detonate, they broadcasted a single, chilling message across the Zorvok fleet. "This is what happens when you push us too far. We will not stop. This is our world, and we will burn everything you have to the ground before we lose it." The Zorvok's realization. The explosion of the Vector sent shockwaves through the Zorvok fleet. They had expected the humans to crumble, to fold under the pressure. Instead, the humans showed them something even more terrifying, a willingness to fight to the bitter end, no matter the cost. The Zorvok generals, who had long prided themselves on their strategic brilliance, now realized that the human species was not simply a threat, they were a nightmare waiting to be unleashed. On Zorvok homeworlds, discussions began. There were those who still believed the humans could be crushed with sheer force, that the Zorvok could conquer them as they had done with countless others. But the generals and high commanders who had observed humanity's resolve were not so sure. They feared that a prolonged war with humanity would not end in victory, but in destruction for both sides. The Zorvok, for the first time, found themselves considering negotiation, but deep down, they knew the truth. They had awoken something in humanity that they couldn't control, something far more dangerous than they could comprehend. The humans, now fully aware of the stakes, continued to adapt, evolve, and fight. They weren't just defending their planet anymore, they were fighting for their very survival. And if the Zorvok couldn't understand that, if they couldn't see the depth of human resolve, they would find out soon enough. The galaxy had underestimated humanity once, but now, the humans had made their message clear. They weren't just a species, they were a force of nature, a storm that no empire could stand against. And the Zorvok had no idea how close they were to facing the full wrath of humanity. End of Part 2. Part 3, The Wrath of Humanity. The destruction of the Vector reverberated across the Zorvok fleet. In every war room, on every command bridge, the Zorvok generals and admirals felt a deep, primal unease. The humans had done what was once considered impossible. They had struck a blow that shattered the Zorvok's carefully crafted sense of invulnerability. And the worst part? They had done it without the Zorvok ever truly understanding why. On Earth, the victory was bittersweet. The human resistance had taken a heavy toll, but Sarah O'Connell's actions had inspired millions to rise up against the alien invaders. The world's governments, once fractured and divided, had united under the single banner of survival. Nations that had been at war with each other for centuries set aside their differences to focus on a common enemy. The fight for Earth had become the fight for all of humanity. The counterattack. In the wake of the Vector attack, the Zorvok decided it was time to retaliate. They had underestimated the human capacity for defiance, but now they would make sure that the message was clear: Earth was to be theirs. The Zorvok fleet, larger and more advanced than the combined forces of humanity, moved toward Earth with cold, calculated precision. Their plan was simple: crush the human resistance, devastate the Earth's colonies, and bring the fight to an end with overwhelming force. There would be no room for mercy this time. However, humanity had learned something crucial during their brief skirmish with the Zorvok. The aliens, for all their power, lacked the understanding of human will. They fought to conquer. The humans fought to survive. The first battle of the new war began as the Zorvok's flagship, the Nexarath, descended on Earth's atmosphere. But this time, the humans had prepared. Sarah O'Connell, now a legend in her own right, had led the charge to create new technologies and tactics that could turn the tide. They had scavenged and reverse-engineered Zorvok tech. Human ingenuity had turned their primitive ships into powerful threats. The humans had adapted, fast and ruthlessly. As the Zorvok fleet entered Earth's orbit, they were met with an unexpected defense. Space mines, seemingly primitive but effective, began detonating around the Nexarath, causing massive damage to its hull. Zorvok ships scrambled, trying to regroup, but the humans weren't just fighting with technology. They were fighting with a mindset that Zorvok military leaders couldn't fathom: the relentless drive to never give up, no matter the cost. Deploy all fighters. The Zorvok commander barked, realizing that the battle wasn't going as planned. But it was too late. The human fleet, despite being outgunned and outnumbered, launched wave after wave of missile attacks, sabotaging key Zorvok ships and forcing them into retreat. The humans weren't trying to win, they were just trying to keep the Zorvok from winning. And as long as they kept fighting, the Zorvok would never have peace. A human weapon. On the ground, in the ruins of a former Zorvok base, Sarah O'Connell and her unit discovered something that would change everything: a Zorvok biological weapon. It was housed in a secure facility, one that was heavily guarded. But it was clear from the data they retrieved that this weapon was designed to wipe out entire populations, genocidal in nature. The Zorvok had created this weapon for one purpose: to exterminate any species that could pose a threat to their empire. But to Sarah and her team, the weapon represented something else: an opportunity. "We use this," O'Connell said, her voice grim. "If they want to see how far we're willing to go, let's show them." The Marines, heavily armed and with a one-way ticket to hell, prepared to transport the weapon to a hidden launch site. Their goal was not just to defend Earth, but to make it clear to the Zorvok that they could never win. The weapon would not be used for genocide, it would be used as a message. The final stand. As the Zorvok forces gathered for a final assault on Earth's capital, the human military made their move. They launched a full-scale counteroffensive, but this time, the stakes were higher than ever before. The weapon that O'Connell had found would not be deployed unless absolutely necessary. Humanity had always fought within some bounds of morality, but if the Zorvok continued their campaign of destruction, those bounds would be shattered. In the midst of the battle, Sarah O'Connell found herself face to face with the Zorvok general she had once spoken to on that distant moon. His face, usually confident and cold, now showed signs of confusion and fear. "You," the general said, his voice faltering. "You humans, you fight like demons." Sarah raised her weapon but didn't fire. Instead, she spoke the words that had haunted the Zorvok for weeks. "You were right about one thing," she said, her voice steady but carrying the weight of 1,000 battles. "We are not weak, but we can be more ruthless than you could ever imagine. You think we fight because we have to? No, we fight because we choose to." The Zorvok general hesitated, but before he could respond, O'Connell's unit detonated the device they had planted, a powerful EMP burst that fried the Zorvok's communication systems and disabled their fleet. At the same time, the message went out to every Zorvok ship: "If you want to win this war, you'll have to break every rule. We'll fight with everything we have, every last human, and we'll make you regret it for the rest of your existence." The Zorvok fleet, crippled and confused, began to retreat. The alien commanders didn't understand. How could they? The concept of a species so committed to survival that they would risk everything, including their morality, was incomprehensible. Aftermath. The battle was over, but the war had just begun. Humanity had sent a clear message: they would not surrender. They would fight to the bitter end, using every tactic and every strategy at their disposal. But more than that, they would never be subjugated. The Zorvok learned the hard way that they had made a grave mistake underestimating humanity. They thought they could conquer Earth as they had countless other worlds. Instead, they had awakened a force of nature, an unstoppable, relentless will to survive. And in the quiet moments after the battle, when the dust settled and the survivors took stock of what had been lost, Sarah O'Connell looked out across the horizon. The war was far from over, but humanity had proven one thing beyond all else: never again would they be considered harmless. The Zorvok had learned that lesson the hard way, and now, humanity's war had only just begun. End of Part 3. Part 4, The Unseen Consequence. The Zorvok fleet retreated in disarray, but their withdrawal did little to alleviate the tension that hung thick in the air. Earth, though battered, had endured, and humanity's message had been made clear. Yet as the dust settled, the true consequences of the war began to unfold. Across Earth's war councils and military command centers, the talk was not about victory but about what came next. The Zorvok had underestimated humanity, and now they knew better. But would this sudden shift in power lead to peace or push both sides to the brink of extinction? Sarah O'Connell stood at the edge of a devastated city, her once pristine uniform now a patchwork of dirt and battle damage. A global coalition of Earth's military forces had won the battle, But the true test lay ahead. Could humanity hold on to their newfound strength without losing what made them human in the process? The war had changed them all. The shifting balance of power. The retreat of the Zorvok did not mark the end of the conflict. In fact, it only heightened the stakes. While humanity was still recovering from the Zorvok's initial invasion, the remnants of their fleet had not gone far. The Zorvok High Command had gone into damage control mode, licking their wounds and recalculating their strategies. The retreat was a tactical withdrawal, a moment to regroup and rearm. But something had changed. The Zorvok had always seen themselves as the apex predators of the galaxy, their advanced technology and overwhelming numbers ensuring their rule over weaker species. Now, for the first time, they were questioning that assumption. The humans, once considered a primitive species with no place in the cosmic hierarchy, had shown they were capable of fighting back with a ruthless, unpredictable ferocity. The Zorvok High Command held a private meeting to discuss humanity's defiance. The fleet admiral was incensed. How could we let this happen? A primitive species with barely a fraction of our firepower should have been wiped out in days, he growled. A strategist, older and more composed, spoke up. You're not seeing the bigger picture. These humans, they don't think like us. They don't care about the rules of war. They're unpredictable, and that makes them dangerous. What do you propose, then? The admiral demanded. We rethink our entire approach. We cannot crush them with overwhelming force. We must be far more subtle. If we underestimate them again, we'll lose more than just ships. We'll lose the war. The strategist's voice was calm but grave. But the admiral, still furious, wasn't convinced. The humans are a temporary threat. They will crumble under the pressure. Once their defenses are exhausted, they'll break. The strategist shook his head slowly. That's what we thought the last time, and it nearly destroyed us. Humanity's response. Back on Earth, the mood was different. In the wake of the victory, there was a sense of relief, yes, but also something darker, a realization that the war had just begun. Humanity had turned the tide for now, but they knew the Zorvok would return with more fury. The global alliance had built its defenses, but was it enough? Would the Zorvok return stronger than ever? The United Earth Command, UEC, was now tasked with planning humanity's next steps. But Sarah O'Connell, despite the celebrations of the victory, knew the world wasn't ready for what was to come. Earth's forces had already begun rebuilding, rearming, and enhancing their technology. But there was a growing worry. Could humanity maintain the line? And more importantly, could they hold on to their humanity without becoming like the Zorvok themselves? In secret bunkers beneath the planet's surface, O'Connell met with a handful of high-ranking officers and civilian leaders to discuss the future. The discussion was a mix of strategy and philosophy. The enemy wasn't just the Zorvok anymore. It was what the war was turning humanity into. We can't let this war destroy us, Sarah said firmly, looking around at the faces of those gathered. The Zorvok may be ruthless, but that's not who we are. We fight to survive. Yes, but we can't lose ourselves in the process. One of the officers, a young and eager commander, spoke up. We can't afford to play by their rules, Captain. We've already seen what happens when we show mercy. They don't respect that. They respect strength. If we want to win, we have to break them. O'Connell shook her head. And what happens after we break them? What kind of world do we live in if we become just like them? The room fell silent. The question lingered in the air, heavy with its implications. A new strategy. The global powers had begun to see the necessity of taking the fight to the Zorvok. They weren't merely going to defend Earth anymore. They needed to carry the war to Zorvok space, destroy their infrastructure, cripple their fleets before they could regroup. Sarah O'Connell was part of a new initiative, a coalition force known as the Human Coalition Expeditionary Force, HCEF. The mission was simple in theory: go to the Zorvok homeworld, take out their power centers, and force them into a position where they would negotiate. But even as they crafted their strategies, they knew they were pushing the boundaries of what they considered acceptable. The line between self-defense and revenge was dangerously thin. We're not just defending anymore, O'Connell said, her voice heavy with the weight of the new mission. We're striking first, but if we lose ourselves in the process, it's not a victory, it's our extinction. She stared at the plans laid out before her, massive, coordinated strikes on key Zorvok planets. The goal was to cripple them, But the cost would be staggering. Humanity would be forced to make decisions they had never even imagined before the war started. But there was no turning back now. The Zorvok would either accept humanity's terms or face utter destruction. The first strike. The HCEF, the largest coalition force ever assembled by humanity, launched its first offensive against the Zorvok stronghold, a barren planet on the edge of their empire. The Zorvok's reaction was immediate. They fought back with everything they had. The human forces, bolstered by technology that had been reverse-engineered from the remnants of the Zorvok invasion, held their ground, pushing into Zorvok territory. The humans weren't just fighting for survival now, they were fighting for their future. But each victory came at a cost. For every Zorvok stronghold they destroyed, for every Zorvok fleet they crippled, the line between them and their enemies grew thinner. The same ruthlessness they had fought to avoid was now creeping into their ranks. O'Connell stood before her troops, looking at the faces of the men and women who had followed her into battle. We're not just soldiers, we're the last hope of humanity. We fight because we have no choice, but we fight to keep our humanity. 2. We will win this war, but we must never forget who we are. She had no answers, no easy answers, only the resolve to win, and the haunting question of what that victory would cost. End of Part 4. Part 5, The Breaking Point. The war with the Zorvok had escalated, each battle more destructive than the last. Humanity, once on the defensive, had become the aggressors, pushing further into Zorvok territory with relentless force. The human coalition had found itself in a precarious position. Victory seemed inevitable. But at what cost? The line between survival and becoming what they had fought against was blurring. Sarah O'Connell's nightmares had become increasingly vivid. Images of the war's toll, on both the battlefield and within herself. The constant violence, the brutal strikes, the desperate choices they were forced to make, it was all taking its toll on her soul. She knew the war had changed them, but she couldn't help wondering, how much longer could they hold on to their humanity? The Zorvok's last stand. The Zorvok had retreated to the core of their empire. Their last stronghold nestled deep in a system surrounded by mines, black holes, and uncharted space. They had regrouped, rearmed, and created a new, terrifying weapon, one that could potentially wipe out entire planetary systems. The Zorvok High Command had made the decision to fight until the end, using their most advanced weaponry and unrelenting tactics. The final confrontation was inevitable. The Vek-NR, the most powerful warship in the Zorvok fleet, stood at the heart of their last bastion. It was equipped with an energy cannon capable of obliterating entire planets. If they couldn't break humanity's resistance here, the Zorvok would lose everything. Humanity, now fully aware of the stakes, had gathered their most elite forces. The Human Coalition Expeditionary Force was prepared for one last strike, one that would either end the war or destroy Earth in the process. As Sarah O'Connell looked out at the final battle plans laid before her, she couldn't ignore the gnawing fear deep inside her heart. Victory was within reach, but so was the potential for utter annihilation. The final mission. The mission was simple: destroy the Vek-NR, the flagship of the Zorvok fleet, and prevent them from launching the devastating energy cannon. However, as O'Connell and her team gathered, there was an unspoken understanding: some of them might not make it back. The team that would board the Vek-NR consisted of the bravest of the brave, humanity's finest soldiers. They would infiltrate the Zorvok ship, sabotage its core systems, and disable the weapon before it could fire. "This is it, folks," O'Connell said, addressing the unit in a quiet, determined voice. "We win this, we end it. If we fail, we all die. But we die fighting for our future, and if that's what it takes, then it's worth it." They were all prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice, but none of them spoke of the fear that had settled in their hearts, not even as the countdown to launch began. Infiltrating the Zorvok flagship. The HCEF fleet launched a diversionary assault on the outer Zorvok defenses, drawing their attention away from the Vek-NR. Meanwhile, O'Connell's unit, aboard a small, stealthy spacecraft, made their way into the heart of enemy territory. It was a suicide mission, but they had no choice but to press on. The interior of the Vek-NR was a labyrinth of alien technology, and the crew was more numerous than anticipated. With each step, the humans advanced deeper into the ship, taking down guards silently, moving like shadows through the dark halls of the enemy's most powerful vessel. O'Connell led the charge, her mind focused solely on the objective, but as they neared the core, she couldn't shake the overwhelming sense that they were being watched. It wasn't the Zorvok that unnerved her. It was the realization that something even darker than the enemy itself lurked in the corners of her mind, the ever-present fear of becoming something worse than what they were fighting against. She had always believed that humanity's strength came from their resolve, their moral compass. But now, facing the final assault on the Zorvok flagship, she felt the chilling pull of the darkness that had begun to creep into the hearts of so many soldiers. The line between victory and annihilation had become razor-thin. The moment of truth. They reached the core of the Vekanar. The Zorvok commander, a towering, armored figure, stood before them, waiting. He had known they would come, and he had prepared for this moment. "You're too late," the Zorvok general hissed, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Your world is already doomed." O'Connell didn't hesitate, not while we're still breathing. A fierce battle erupted. The humans, armed with experimental weapons and superior tactics, fought valiantly, but the Zorvok were relentless. O'Connell's unit engaged in a fierce firefight with the alien soldiers, each moment drawing them closer to the core. As the battle raged, the Zorvok general activated the energy cannon. In a split second, O'Connell made a decision. It was a choice that would haunt her forever, but it was the only way to win. She launched a grenade at the core controls, knowing the explosion would set off a chain reaction that would destroy the Vekanar. But the Zorvok general lunged toward her, knocking the device from her hands. In a split-second decision, she fought back, disarming the general with brutal efficiency, her actions colder than any soldier should ever be. As the explosion engulfed the Vekanar, the general's last words echoed in O'Connell's ears. "You've won, but you've lost everything." The aftermath. The explosion destroyed the Vekanar, taking the heart of the Zorvok fleet with it. The battle was over. Humanity had won. The Zorvok had been defeated, their war machine broken, their empire on the brink of collapse. But at what cost? Sarah O'Connell, now standing in the smoldering remains of the battlefield, felt a hollow victory. The price of this triumph was more than just lives, it was the very soul of humanity. The choice she made, the cold, calculated decision to destroy the Zorvok general and disable the weapon, had cost her something irreplaceable. She had crossed a line she never thought she would. She had won the war, but at what cost? Would the future humanity built be worth the price they had paid to survive? As she gazed at the ruins of the Zorvok fleet, the enormity of what they had accomplished began to settle in. The war was over, but the questions lingered. Humanity had survived, yes, but now they had to rebuild. The challenge was no longer just to fight, it was to rebuild a world that would never forget the horrors of war, and to make sure they never lost sight of the very things that made them human. End of Part 5. Part 6, The Reckoning. The war with the Zorvok had left deep scars across the planet, not just physically, but within the hearts and minds of every survivor. The victory was hollow. It felt as though the price of survival had eroded the very essence of humanity. Sarah O'Connell stood in the ruins of what was once a thriving metropolis, looking at the rebuilding efforts. The work was slow, painstaking, and relentless. It wasn't just about rebuilding cities, it was about rebuilding trust, rebuilding themselves, and determining what kind of future they were willing to fight for. The New World. In the aftermath of the war, Earth had become a different place. The Unified Earth Council, UEC, had emerged as the dominant force, responsible for the governance and reconstruction of the planet. The nations of Earth were no longer separate entities, they had unified in the face of an alien threat that had nearly wiped them out. But unity, as they had learned in the war, came with its own set of challenges. Humanity was rebuilding, but the scars of war ran deep. The military was stronger than ever, but many veterans returned home with more than just physical wounds. The psychological toll of the war was immense. The atrocities committed by both sides had left the human race questioning the very essence of their identity. Sarah had been one of the leaders of the human counteroffensive, but even now, as she stood before a new council of leaders, she found herself wondering whether the price of victory had been worth it. She had killed Zorvok soldiers, yes, but she had also killed Zorvok civilians, made choices that would have been unthinkable before the war began. And yet, she had no choice. It was them or us. The price of survival. The final blow to the Zorvok had been decisive, but the remnants of their species lingered in the shadows. Some Zorvok had surrendered, but many had retreated into the fringes of the galaxy, their hatred for humanity fanning the flames of revenge. It was clear that, even though the war was over, the consequences of their actions would echo for generations. Humanity had won, but now it faced a dangerous and difficult truth. The Zorvok's fear of humans had transformed into an ever-growing animosity. Sarah had learned, through bitter experience, that peace was never simple. The war crimes committed by both sides were too numerous to ignore. The Zorvok might have invaded Earth first, but humanity had done their own share of damage. There was a trial, the first of many, held in the aftermath of the war. Many leaders, including O'Connell herself, were called to account for the choices made during the conflict. The courts were filled with stories of brutality, of innocent lives lost, of civilians caught in the crossfire. Some of the stories came from Earth itself, others came from the Zorvok worlds, where human forces had fought mercilessly to break the enemy's will. Sarah sat before the tribunal, her face hard, but inside, she was a storm of emotions, her hands clenched at her sides. She had fought for survival. She had done what was necessary to protect Earth and humanity. But now, she was forced to confront the consequences of that survival. The idea of war crimes was no longer theoretical. It was real, and it was staring her down in the form of hundreds of people whose lives had been destroyed by the conflict. "I did what I had to," Sarah said, her voice steady but laced with a deep sorrow. "I fought to protect Earth, to protect humanity, and if I had to do it again, I would. But I know what we've become. We're no better than the enemy we fought, and that," she paused, struggling to find the words, "that is something we'll have to reckon with for the rest of our lives." A moment of reflection. Weeks passed after the tribunal, but Sarah couldn't shake the haunting thoughts of the war. Everywhere she went, people told stories of bravery, of victories, but beneath the surface, there was a quiet unease, a collective acknowledgement that humanity had crossed a line. What would they be like now, in the aftermath of the war? Would they ever be able to rebuild not just their cities but their souls? Sarah sat alone in her quarters, staring out at the stars through a small window. The stars had always held a certain beauty for her, a reminder of the vast universe that existed beyond Earth. Now, though, they seemed distant, almost unreachable. She wondered how the Zorvok viewed those stars. How many of them had seen the same sky, only to be consumed by their own hatred and pride? "What now?" she whispered to herself, knowing the question was too large to answer. A knock at the door broke her reverie, and she turned to see one of her old comrades, Captain Elias Torres, standing in the doorway. He had served alongside her throughout the war, and they had both seen things that no one should ever have to witness. "You still wondering if it was worth it?" Torres asked, his voice soft but heavy with the weight of experience. "Every damn day," Sarah replied, her voice betraying a rare moment of vulnerability. "We saved the planet, Sarah. We gave humanity a chance to survive. That's worth something." "But at what cost?" Sarah whispered, her eyes lowering to the floor. Torres walked in and sat next to her. "We didn't just save humanity, we saved ourselves. The war, what it did to us, it's made us better, in a way." Sarah looked at him, eyes narrowing. "Better? How?" "Not in the sense that we're perfect, but in the sense that we know what we're capable of. We've seen the worst of ourselves, and we've survived it. That counts for something." She sighed, her head tilting back against the wall. "Maybe, but I'm not sure we can ever go back to who we were before. The line between us and the Zorvok, it's getting harder to see." "There's no going back, Sarah. There never is. But there's always a chance to move forward." The future of humanity. The days after the war were filled with reconstruction, but not just of cities or technologies. This was a reconstruction of ideals. Humanity would never be the same. The price of survival had demanded more than just blood. It had demanded a soul-searching reckoning. Yet in the midst of the rebuilding, a new question arose. What kind of future would humanity build? The government leaders, soldiers, and civilians who had endured the war faced an uncertain future. They could choose to rebuild in the image of their former selves, grasping for the fleeting comforts of their pre-war lives, or they could build a new world, one forged in the crucible of the war, but guided by a renewed understanding of compassion and restraint. Sarah O'Connell knew that the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. But she also knew that humanity was capable of more than just survival. They were capable of redemption. And though the scars of the war would never fade, the human spirit had proved its strength. As she stood before the assembly of leaders, looking out at the faces of a united Earth, she knew the path forward was theirs to choose. The war had taken so much from them, but it had also given them the opportunity to rebuild. To rebuild not just cities, but their values, their humanity. They had proven that humanity, no matter the cost, would fight to the bitter end for its future. And as the first steps of peace were taken, Sarah knew one thing for certain: the human spirit had been tested, and it had not broken. End of part 6. End of the story.